Hey everyone, John here, welcome back. In this tutorial, I'm going to break down how I took this rather shaky looking snake footage and used a little bit of Mocha Pro with Continuum, including Primatte Studio and a lot of Color Link to create this more interesting looking title card. Let's jump in. Alright, so here's the final look in After Effects. And obviously the hero of this is the snake. And the original footage has a fair bit of camera shake, so we have to address that first. So I've done that in a pre-comp. It's going to go through into this comp here. So this is a 4K shot. Great looking image of the snake. And you can see it's actually been stabilized. And for that I used Mocha Pro. I'm just going to turn that off. And if we look at the original footage, that's pretty shaky and obviously unusable for what I wanted it for. So let's go into Mocha Pro and take a look. I haven't done a lot of stabilizing using Mocha Pro, and it was really interesting to see how well it worked with this shot. Basically, all I had to do, I'm not going to go through the whole process now, I'm just going to show you what I did. So I grabbed the X-spline tool and just created a spline around the moss here. I thought that was probably the best area to track because it's fairly close to the middle of the frame. And, you know, there's no movement through this well, the moss is not moving like the snake is moving. And the back is, the background is fairly blurred. I probably could planar track that, but I thought this was definitely the best area to choose. So I tracked that forward just using translation, scale, and rotation. And once that was tracked, clicking over on the Stabilize tab, and importantly, choosing maximum smoothing because this gives me 100% stabilization. This is turned off by default, and the default settings take out the jitter, but they keep some of the natural camera shake. And often that's probably what you'll want, but I wanted maximum smoothing. So I turned that on, and that completely removed any of the camera shake, which was great. So the snake is now rock solid and perfect to go ahead. Obviously, you can see the edges of the frame, but that's fine because like I said, this is a 4K vision being used in an HD final comp. So that was the snake stabilization. I'm not going to save that. Just going to turn that on, and there you go. Looking great. So that's now ready to be keyed out, and that's done in the next comp. So you can see I've got multiple compositions here because when you're keying, often if you can't pull a good key, you need to use more than one layer and then build your matte. And I think I've pulled a pretty good matte for this. You can see I've got obviously a lot of green in the moss, but still been able to pull a pretty good key. So what I want to do is just walk you through basically how I approach that. And for that, I used BCC's Primatte Studio. And this is my first time, I have to admit, to use Primatte Studio, and I found it really good. So I'll just walk you through what I did. I'm going to just reset that, and let's take a look at this. So obviously I've got a mask, a holdout mask, and this is just an After Effects mask around the snake. Because there's no sense trying to key out these areas, obviously. Just trying to focus the area that I have to key around the snake. So a quick mask, and then Primatte Studio. So this is a pretty easy effect to use. There's a lot of settings, but it's pretty much a one-stop shop for keying. And it's the only effect I needed to get this key looking good. Let's take a look at how I approached it. Now in the control panel here in After Effects, you can see the Auto Analyze button is at the top, and it's basically a top-down workflow. And I didn't use all of these settings, just the main ones up here, and just matte status. So first thing I'm going to do is click Auto Analyze. And you'll see it starts to do a pretty good job. It's pulled out that color there, but obviously this more shadowed area is a problem, and it's pulling out a bit of this as well. So the next thing to do is with clean background selected, and also with matte status selected, is to zero in on this a bit more. So we've got areas of full opacity, black is full transparency, and gray is halfway in between those, or some way in between those. So semi-transparency. So what I'm going to do is with clean background selected, I'm just going to drag on the areas that I want to be the background. So I'm going to clean those up And obviously this is fully opaque at the moment. I've got to grab that, and look what happens. It pulls out a lot of that green and a lot of that shadow. So I'm going to have to, probably bring that mask around. Maybe not. I've just pulled that out there, and just grab that. Just cleaning this up. I love sort of the click and drag workflow with this. It's very artist friendly. So let's go back to our final composite. And okay, so we've removed a lot of that, but that's what we're going to duplicate the layers for, to bring that back. And the snake also looks a bit weird. So I'm going to click clean foreground, and then I'm going to just clean that up as well. You can see how that pulls back or reintroduces all of that detail. So it no longer looks strange. Now we are losing the eye. You can see that's a problem. And I'm really mostly focusing just on the snake because I want to get that right, and then I can reintroduce this other stuff afterwards. So what I want to do now is refine this a bit. So I'm going to come down and click on Matte Refinement. And I want to choke this a little bit. So I've got a little cheat sheet here. My setting was about 19. I'm going to choose 19 and just choke that back a bit. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to bring Grow down to 50. So we've choked the matte back a little bit, not too much because we're going to start losing some of the scales. And by decreasing Grow, we pulled a little bit of this back. You can see if I bring that up to 100, you can see we're losing some of that. Most important thing here is the choke. What I also want to do is turn on Edge Cleaner, and I'm going to get an error message. Well, I'm going to get a warning saying that I have to change my spill replace mode. So if I just twirl that open and choose none, because I don't have to worry about spill here, now I can access the Edge Cleaner. And cleaning radius, I'm going to set to 22. You can see that's really helped with that edge there, and we haven't lost those scales, which is good. And edge sensitivity, I've got a setting of 79. And that's basically what I did to get the main key of the snake. And I could go in and fine tune these a little bit more, but I think that pulled that out pretty well. So I'm just going to delete that, and I'm going to turn on the one that I had. So that's the one that I had. It's a little bit cleaner. I got a little bit cleaner around the face. And you can see by refining the matte and using Edge Cleaner, I've pulled back that eye detail as well, which is really good. But as I mentioned, I'm losing a lot of this stuff. So that's why I created a second one. So here you can see I've adjusted the settings and pulled back a lot of this, and then just masked that off and added it to this one, like that. So if you can't get the result you want with one key, then use a couple. Obviously, it's pulling in a little bit of the black around here, but that is hidden by the background that it's over. We are losing a little bit of this as well. So to bring that back, all I did was just duplicate the snake without Primatte Keyer and just pulled that back on underneath, just like that. So overall, considering that the background was pretty non-uniform as far as color and also shadow, it's pulled a pretty good key, and I haven't had to use any other effects, just Primatte Studio. So with the snake stabilizing key, the next thing is to look at the background. So I'm just going to close up my snake, and here in the main comp, just double click on my background comp. And I could have used the stabilized shot of the snake with the blurred out background, but it was pretty boring. So I wanted to introduce a much more, vibrant jungle scene into the background. And for that, if I just turn off BCC Plus Rack Focus, I've just used another 4K piece of footage. It's got a little bit of movement in it. It's got no camera movement in it, which is important. So no camera shake. And I thought that was just nice and, bright green, nice and vibrant, but a little bit too sharp because I wanted to still have some depth of field. So to reintroduce a little bit of the depth of field or rack focus, I used BCC Plus's rack focus effect. just applied that and just adjusted the blur X amount. So not too much. You can see if I bring it up though, it gives us some beautiful hexagonal shapes there. But not too much, not too little, just enough to pull the snake a little bit out of the background. Let me just turn off all of this, and we've got that, right? So it feels like it sits in there. Obviously, that's because I'm using Color Link as well, which we'll look at in a moment. Just coming back to the background. And because it's 4K, I can reposition it and find the best spot for it. Obviously, there's some very bright areas here. One thing I would like to do is probably remove a bit of these blown out bright areas. We'll do that in a moment. But I also wanted to add an extra layer of interest to this. So to do that, I created some text, just some lines of text, and just turn the top one on. So I've got 3 rows of text here. So I basically typed in 5 rows of text, and I duplicated that and kept 3 and 2, because you can see I've actually got position keyframes on there. So this one here, I'm just animating from right to left, just animating the position. And this one here, I'm animating in the opposite direction. Okay? So I get this kind of, this contradictory movement, which is really nice. Now, to colorize the text, I actually use BCC Plus's Color Link effect. So let me just turn that off. So this is just some light gray text, and with BCC Plus Color Link, I've used the sample layer as the jungle. So that's given me that green look. Now, BCC Color Link's sample method by default is set to diffuse color. And you can see blur is at 70. I'm going to bring that down, and look at that. So what Color Link is doing, it's actually using the footage to fill the text that Color Link is applied to. But by having a blur option as well, I can just knock that back, and I get these nice areas of shade and lightness, and really make that text look like it fits within this scene. And by the way, if you're wondering what the text says, they're actually different kinds of snakes. And it doesn't really matter whether you can work out what the text says. The whole point of the text is it's more of a graphical element. But there's also, kind of a semi-hidden meaning in there. And you might make it out, the first time you watch this, or you might never realize that they're snakes' names. But like I said, it's a graphic element more than anything. Notice how you've got shadow in the background and it's dark here. If you didn't want that to happen, you can use the flip options. So here, flip sample is set to off. If I flip the X, now it's actually flipping. If I just bring blur down to 0, now it's actually flipping the background. And that gives us, a different look. There are other flip options. I can flip Y and I can flip XY as well. So if you didn't want it to be basically taking the background and placing it onto the text in this case and blurring it out, then you can use those flip options. But I was okay with that, because I kind of wanted to look fairly integrated, like it's, like the text is moving through this shadow. So that's Color Link. It's a really great way to integrate the text with the background and make it look like it's more unified. So if we come back to the main comp, that's how it looks. Now, I did mention there's these bright areas in here, and they can be a little bit distracting with this. I'm just going to turn these other ones back on. It kind of is a little bit distracting. So I think after I recorded this, what I might show you is just a way to get rid of that. A quick way to get rid of that is just to double click on that. And now the areas that I want, because I've moved this around, I think it's this area here. Let me just come back to my comp, and yeah, we got that there. So we want to kind of remove this area here, and to do that, I can just use the clone tool. So if I click on the clone tool, and just hold down the Alt key and just sample a different area. Just come back to 0 seconds here. Just sample a different area, something that's, you know, like that. Just going to sample that, and that's basically hidden that. So a really quick way, just using the clone tool. I don't use the clone tool in After Effects very much, but it saves me having to duplicate that layer and blur it and mask it out and whatever. So I come back to the main comp now, just close the layer. You can see that's now been hidden. I think that little specular highlight on the leaf is okay. I could also remove that if I wanted to, but I think that's good. It just gets rid of that unnecessary bright area. Now, I also wanted to just mention the text. Let me just close that up and come back to my background. Here, what I've done is use normal blend mode, but I was playing around with different blend modes. If we turn this off, come back to the main comp, this actually works well to make the snake feel more integrated to the background. Remember, we created some, rack focus effect, and it looks quite natural. If we come back and turn this back on, it does go some way towards, reducing that depth of field feel. And I did go with this look in the end. I preferred this to not having the text, but I was playing around. Let's just go side by side here. And let's just come back to our background. I'm going to just get my selection tool there. And let's play around with a few different blend modes. It's good to have them side by side so we can see what we're doing. Now, when I was mucking around with this just prior to recording, I thought that maybe something like screen might be good. Yeah, see how that changes that? That's quite nice as well. Screen definitely works, but check this out. When I chose lighter color, check this out. What it does, it makes the text feel like it's, being hidden behind the leaves, which is actually quite interesting. Here in the main comp, you can see how it looks like the text is hidden in the background foliage. And is that, worthwhile for this? I don't know necessarily, because you kind of can't make out the text. And so you have to ask yourself as a designer, why is the text even there if, the viewer can't tell what it is? It becomes a distraction. But I thought that was really interesting, just the way it kind of hides that in the background foliage. So it's always fun to come in and when you're comping stuff up, try different blend modes and see what it gives you. So I wanted to point that out. I definitely wouldn't use that for this, like I said, because it looks like it would be a distraction. And definitely don't want to use Dancing Dissolve. Anyone actually ever used Dancing Dissolve? I'm going to bring that back to normal for now. Okay, so here's what we have so far. And I've just turned off the BCC Plus Color Link and Light Wrap effects so we can see how the snake looks without those. So let's go ahead and take a look at those effects now. So this is the snake without it. I'm going to turn BCC Plus Color Link on. So you can see how that changed that somewhat. And I'm using the background layer as the sample layer. Let's just reset this and we'll check it out. So by default with the soft light blend mode, we're getting some change. You can see getting some change, but we haven't chosen a sample layer. So I'm going to choose my background. Aha. So as we saw before, the sample method by default is diffuse color. If we bring the blur down to 0, you can see how that's sampling the background. And it's also, pulling in the text because the text is part of the background now. So we definitely don't want that. We could use diffuse color. We could try and flip it, see how that changes. It doesn't seem to make a big difference. There's slight changes. We could try different sampling methods, average as opposed to median, or, the brightest parts, which is not going to look very good. or the darkest, which is going to be too dark. But I think, diffuse color works fine. And, you could try different blend modes to see how that goes. And it really is on soft light by default, because that really is the one which you tend to use the most. So overall, it looks, it definitely looks better, but it is a little dark. So this is where color correction comes in. So we can enable color correction, and then we can, play with things like the gamma and just bring a bit of that brightness back to it. So we can get the overall feel of the color of the background and the luminosity, the contrast, but we're not locked in just to these settings here. We can fine tune. So without, it's a little washed out, a little pale. The light doesn't look quite right. But with it, it just pulls in a bit of that green, makes it feel like it's in that environment. So loving Color Link for this kind of thing. And obviously, as the background changes in brightness or darkness, or whatever happens to the background, it's reflected in the snake because the Color Link effect is applied. And I've also used a little bit of BC Plus light wrap. And this is also using as a wrap source the background. If we just come up to the edge here and turn that on, you can see it mostly in, this areas here. Not too much, but this is really helpful to get rid of some of that black that we couldn't quite get rid of with Primatte. See, it just knocks that out and works really well. I love light wrap for composites. It just helps make that sit in the background a little bit better. Really love that. It's one of my favorite Continuum effects. So it's going to twirl this up again and take a look at before and after. So that's before and that's after. Color Link and light wrap. And while we're talking about Color Link, let's just take a look at the title. So you can see I've got Color Link applied to that as well. I'm going to turn that off. So I've got some gray text. And when I set this up originally, I actually used the snake to colorize the text. And I just duplicated the snake layer, scaled it right up so the yellow scales were really big. And then I used that. But I thought, why don't I just use a different effect to create that? So I actually used Sapphire. I've got this Sapphire texture cells layer. Just used a preset and just changed the color. And you can see it has this, rotation speed. So there's a little bit of movement in there, which I liked. So sampled a few colors from the background, and I can turn that off. And with BCC Plus Color Link, I've just used that as my sample layer. So my texture cells layer. And you can see I've also chosen effects and masks because I haven't pre-composed this effect. Now, you might be saying, John, why don't you just apply texture cells directly to the text? I'll show you why. Let me grab texture cells, copy, apply it to the text, paste. Okay, looks nice. But I want to blur it as well. So, if I want to blur it, if I apply a blur to this, it's going to blur the text as well. So, maybe I can set something up with a track matte. It's just a little more complicated. So by using Color Link, I can just apply it and I've got the built-in blur, right? So if I don't want blur, I just bring that to 0. And that's also quite interesting. Kind of, emulates those scales, which is really nice. But if I do want a little bit of blur, I just increase that amount. And there we go. So using a different layer this time, texture cells, to colorize the text using Color Link. And something to keep in mind here is I've used the normal blend mode instead of soft light. You can see with soft light, it kind of looks washed out. One that did look quite good was hard light. You can see how that makes it a bit brighter. So I would definitely use that if I did this again. But normal is really good for this particular situation. Generally, you don't really want to use normal for, say, something like the snake. If I just select the snake and come back to Color Link and choose normal, see how it covers the entire layer with the background. If I bring that blur down to 0, you can see basically we're getting the predator look for this. Just being in the jungle, I guess that kind of makes sense. And maybe something I can do in a future tutorial, who knows, give me an idea. But for this particular situation with the text, I really need the normal because it gives me the look that I want. So it definitely has a use in when working with text and I guess logos. So the very last thing I want to just talk about is, you may have noticed it, this little shadow here. Because we're trying to create the illusion of depth with this. I think it really helps with these kind of things if it doesn't look flat. If I turn that off, so there's my snake, and it is the top layer, but it doesn't necessarily have much depth. And I purposely, you can see, you may have noticed how I've trimmed this right back. See how the snake key is right at the end of the composition? Because I chose the final part of the snake footage because it's the only part of the footage where the snake moves its head. If the snake is really stationary throughout, it's not very interesting. I just wanted to grab the piece of vision where the snake moves its head so I can have it moving in front of the text. But without a shadow, it's not very effective. So if I just turn on the shadow and solo it, take a look at this. It's just a little shadow. And to create this effect, what I've done is I have duplicated the snake layer. There it is there. I've applied the drop shadow effect in After Effects, like that. And I've used set matte, and I've used the text as the matte. So let me just turn my text on. There we go. So the text is being used as a matte. And if we turn that on, I can adjust the drop shadow, I can adjust the distance, move that up and down, and just that little shadow makes it feel like the snake is, maybe behind the text, but is coiling up and its face is moving in front of the text. So little things like that can make a big difference to these kinds of looks, I think. Now, I just want to mention that shadow only is checked for the drop shadow. Just solo that and turn off the matte. So basically this is showing us the shadow only and not showing us the snake. If I turn that off, you can see then we get an actual drop shadow on the snake. Now I could have used a fill effect on the snake and a blur, but that's 2 effects. So I just like using this because it means I can get that soft edge, soft feathered edge, and also fill it with whatever color I want, in this case black, just by checking shadow only. Okay. Now, one thing I also want to mention as well, which I didn't mention about Color Link, is the use of a drop shadow on the text. There's a subtle drop shadow on that title, and let me just select that. That's thanks to the drop shadow that's built into Color Link. If I turn that off, see, we lose that drop shadow. So it's nice to have a built-in drop shadow, which is particularly useful for things like text and logos, just to help them sort of stand out from the background. There's also a glow as well, but I didn't need it for this. And if we go into the background, I've used the same here. So let's see, we want to look at this one here. And you can see there's drop shadow. If I turn that off, you can see we're seeing more of that bright background, which I thought was a little too strong. But with the drop shadow on, it just knocks some of that background back. Okay, so once again, great to have drop shadow built in because it just allows you to fine tune your setup when you're working with text and logos. So hopefully you found that useful in understanding how you can use Continuum along with Mocha Pro for the stabilization to transform a piece of stock footage into a finished look. To learn more about Continuum and Mocha Pro and the rest of the Boris Effects suite, visit borisfx.com, where you can also download a free trial. For now, this is John. I'll see you in the next tutorial.